This podcast is a frank discussion on sexual assault. If you are in the USA, for free and confidential help, call 1-800-865-HOPE. In Australia, for confidential counseling and support in cases of sexual assault or abuse, please call 1-800-RESPECT. Welcome to Open Stance, a platform created to cultivate, build, and nurture a unified and connective educational space for survivors and advocates of sexual abuse and sexual violence. Today, I speak with American Jessica Johnson, a former star scholarship track and field athlete for the University of Arkansas Lady Razorbacks. In 2014, Jessica's impressive athletic and academic achievements were recognized and honored when she was named the NCAA Woman of the Year for the state of Arkansas. However, behind the accolades and accomplishments of this standout student athlete is the painful story of her experience of surviving sexual grooming and sexual abuse at the hands of her trusted university track and field coach, John Rembao. Jessica fearlessly sheds light on this horrific abuse of power, the emotional and physical aftermath she suffered as a result of this abuse, and how she and countless other student athletes were failed by the people and institutions who were meant to be protecting and empowering them. Jessica Johnson, your voice is brave, and you are fierce in your integrity to have the laws and policies reformed, making our sporting institutions accountable and safe for all athletes. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you to Open Stance. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Just checking in here from Sydney, Australia. Where are you today?
I am in Grapevine, Texas, just outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport.
Nice one. Well, Jessica, thanks for being here today. I know it's nearly 8 o'clock your time and you've got a sleepover going with a bunch of kids, so I appreciate you carving out this window for us. It's really important. Well, for our listeners, why don't you, if you were to write, say, a little Wikipedia paragraph about yourself to help us get a feel for who you are and where you're from, what would that look like?
Okay, so I was born and raised in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas by two people from Ohio. So I don't have any dramatic accent or anything like that. I went K through 12 in a rapidly growing town that's actually really well known now in Texas, South Lake. And I was a track and field athlete growing up, which is how you and I came to talk to each other. I was the state champion for Texas for 3 years. My senior year, I had mono, which was terrible, and I got second. I accepted a full scholarship to the University of Texas that were national champions at the time for the NCAA Division I, and spent a year there, which we'll also talk about. Transferred to the University of Arkansas, where I realized I was a business major for a year at Texas, and it was not a good fit for me at all. My calling is medicine. So I changed at the University of Arkansas and afterwards went to vet school. When I retired from sports, I went to vet school, and I now specialize in, I'm not boarded, I'm very close, but I'm a veterinarian and I specialize in oromaxillofacial surgery in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So really kind of a small little niche, but is very needed in this area. And I have 3 kids. I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old son and 7-year-old twin daughters.
Amazing. Well, you packed it all in, that's for sure.
I did. I threw it all in there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's a question for you. So how are you feeling about this podcast today?
I feel good about it. My whole trauma, my horrible experience with my previous coach is something that I've been very open about. It was terrible, but I got a lot of good help very quickly, which I think is unique. I have a family member, my mother's a mental health, children's psychiatric nurse practitioner. And so she was very quick to realize that I needed help, and I got it. And once I started understanding everything that happened during that time period, I never looked back, and it never became a secret. So it's easy to talk about it because I've been openly talking about it since 2000.
That's the first time. That is incredible. You didn't let it become a secret.
No, it's actually a little bit, it can be very odd for people. Like if I'm at a let's say I'm at some sort of football, in Texas football, I'm at some party and somebody's wearing a UT Longhorn shirt with that ugly burnt orange color that I have such distaste for, and did even before I went there. And if they're wearing that shirt and I say, oh, ugh, what a terrible color. And they're like, oh, you went to Texas A&M. And I did. A rival school. I went to vet school there. And I say, I did, but that's not why I don't like it. Well, why don't you like it? Well, my coach sexually assaulted and harassed me while I was there as a student athlete. So I had to leave and go to Arkansas. And usually that's kind of that, what? And you're like, yeah. And then I just kind of keep going with what I was doing. So most people in my life have at some point heard the story about that.
I personally, that's incredible. It's one of the most impactful things on a human when you live with these deep, dark secrets of trauma and abuse. And I've heard it over and over and the damage that it causes. So from that perspective, it's incredible to hear that you had that pathway or that support system and ability to keep it from becoming a secret. It's been so devastating for so many survivors. So that's awesome to hear. Well,
and what kind of a layer to that onion that is somewhat interesting is and sad. My mother grew up in Ohio in the 60s, and she was assaulted in middle school by a Catholic priest over and over again. It was a Catholic high school and middle school, and she carried that. And went into child psychiatry, helping kids, depression, anxiety. And when I went through what I went through, she was very quick to get me help. She was so supportive. I mean, so was my dad too, but my mom could really identify the signs of what was going on quicker. And she still carried that secret for another 10 years before she finally told me around the time she turned 60, what had happened to her. And that at that time she was going public back in Ohio to have a statue removed of this predator from that was in her Catholic church she grew up in.
That must have been a moment when she told you.
Yeah, I mean, 2 generations of women, one in, your pretty classic Catholic church situation, and then sports. So, I mean, and then for her to have to see me go through that, and still hold on to what had happened to her and not feel ready to talk about it.
That goes into this whole discussion on positions of power. So you've just mentioned priests, huge powerful position. And now we're talking about your story and coaches. So Jessica, what was it like? Give us a little feel for your coming up through America as one of the top track athletes, and what was that road to college like? So in terms of your recruitment, meeting your coach, his name is John Rembao, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So give us a little idea of what that was like and how you met this, or how you were recruited, and what that relationship started like, and how it progressed.
I mean, I feel very fortunate. I got into track and field when I was 9 and was doing pretty serious summer track and field. And I got to tell you, back then, at the early 90s, late 80s, that was really, I see that now, but that was not something that you saw back then. And people thought it was strange that my parents were so invested, taking me to track meets around the country, and just that I would give up my whole summer, no sleepaway camps, I was just focusing and training. But I loved it. I loved it. And so they supported me and got me good coaches. And so it was a blast because I saw and did things that a lot of my classmates didn't do. I met different kinds of people. You know, I visited different locations. I had exposure to a lot of different cultures that a small town in Texas would not otherwise afford you. And I, you know, it was constantly just positive reinforcement. Just I did well, and people, you know, oh, you did so good, and it you know, made me feel good about myself. And it didn't take long. By the time I was in middle school, I knew that was going to pay for my way to college. Like I had hit that level where we saw the trajectory, we knew where it was going. And by the time I went to high school, I was already at a point where I could get a Division I scholarship in what I was doing. So, I mean, it was a delight. And I met John Rembao at the Olympic Training Center. So the Olympic Training Center will also often have these junior elite programs for various sports. And I was invited to train there every summer for my event in track and field. And they have a women's development coach for the juniors, and he was the coach. And so I had completed my my freshman year, top freshman jumper in the country, there with the top sophomore and junior and senior. And I met John there, and he just was like acting as if I had a lot to offer and just incredible potential, which I felt too, but I felt very validated that I was hearing that from someone else. And that was where I first met him and initiated contact. And that contact, you know, there are those NCAA rules, but I would, you know, he invited me to a winter camp that I went to, and I saw him every year at the Olympic Training Center, which I would consistently be invited to. And I got recruited by, you know, Boston University, you know, Stanford, Harvard, all UCLA, all these schools had a lot of options. And because I had known this coach and thought he was really a great coach, I mean, in order to coach the elite juniors, you would think that would be one of the best. And by the time I decided to go, when I was going to college, he was coaching for the women's national championship team. So it seemed like in order to continue to grow my career, that was the place to go. And that's where I chose to go to college, at the University of Texas at Austin.
And what role did he have in getting you to the school? Was he actually the one recruiting you? Was he involved with you and your parents, or what did that look like?
So I met him when I was, I mean, I'm trying to think, maybe 14, 15, somewhere around there. And you know, it came home, said, there's this coach, he's really great. He says, I'm going to be, you know, I'm very talented. And of course, every parent wants to hear that. And, you know, I told him where he was, and we started that conversation as we were looking already to college. You know, it's 3 years away, but, you know, this is something we've been preparing for a long time. And he, you know, he did get to know my parents. They emailed, they had phone conversations. His wife and he invited me to a camp that was over a winter break out there, and when he was in Arizona before he went to UT. And I went out there and I attended the camp, and I stayed with him and his wife. And there, I mean, so clearly there was a lot of trust there. And so, yeah, by the time it was, you know, we were in that real recruiting season, you know, he came up and visited my family. He may have even stayed at our house. I'm trying to recall if that's how that actually went down. But yeah, he was quick to visit and definitely was very involved in recruiting me.
So establishing a real trusting relationships with you, your parents, well and truly before college started.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the other schools didn't really have a chance. And in fact, looking back, it's really unfair to those schools that he had that advantage. And that, you know, going to college, I didn't really know what the rules were. And I would assume that he was following them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a well-to-do coach. So who is coaching for a top level program in the NCAA.
this is interesting. Looking back at it now from your perspective, you mentioned you got recruited by all the top schools, Stanford, Harvard, like you could have had your choice. All of these schools would have had the elite coaches as well. You're talking the creme de la creme of universities. So looking back, here's John Rembao, who's an elite coach. But what about the process with the other coaches? Did they do anything similar? So when you look back, were there warning signs now when you think, no, the other coaches weren't doing that? Or were there warning signs?
All I can see now is red flags, but I did not back. It was such a slow process. And again, I'm thinking I have him on this pedestal. I didn't know those other coaches definitely were following the rules. And to me, that almost seemed like they weren't really that interested in me, which is completely unfair because they did follow the rules. They sent the letters when they were allowed to as a junior. They made the phone calls on the first time that they could in the summer before my senior year. So they did those things. And I had known this other coach for years before that even happened. So yeah, it's nothing but red flags looking back.
Because you're saying
rules were in place.
That was illegal then, right? What you're saying is his behavior.
I believe so. I mean, I to this day do not know exactly what those rules are and how they've changed, but there's a reason that they wait until your junior year, or at least back then, for contact, and then your senior year for that phone call. And it's only fair to all the colleges that are recruiting you. So it was not only unfair to them, but it's unfair to them, but it was also unfair to me because I didn't get a chance to get to know those people at all.
And this is a really strong piece of education for young student athletes today coming through the high school ranks at this stage and looking at being recruited by schools. And so many times when you're a kid in high school, you can't wait after all these years of hard work to look at who's recruiting you and be in contact and get to that next place. So what you've just outlined is a really important piece to help people understand why these rules are why they're in place. And this is one of them, to protect you.
Well, I absolutely. And it is, it's also very easy when you are young and naive to be wooed and to hear if it seems too good to be true, if it seems a little bit over the top. In retrospect, it probably is. And through the lens at age 40, I mean, very inappropriate. When your coach is recruiting you, you should be talking about, what are your academic goals? What are your educational goals? What are your grad school? What about, what about your career? Your athletic career? What about your performances? All of those things matter. And so to really veer off topic consistently in those interactions is unnecessary. And that is what you have your friends and your family for. When I left UT after having the experience that I did, I left it with a very different, I really saw it as a business moving forward. I said, you know what? These coaches they're paid to coach me. They're going to be rewarded when I succeed. And this is a professional relationship. And it really suited me well to proceed with that in mind. Maybe a little bit more jaded than I would have liked or that I would hope for other people, but they're compartmentalizing it and know that what that relationship should be, what box it should fit in and what boundaries should be around it are important. And when you're young and you really don't understand how not everybody has your best interest in mind, you want to assume the best of people, but unfortunately, athletics do bring in certain people who are looking for certain things that are not always altruistic.
Yeah. I think that was really important what you said there too about in the recruiting process, again, for young student athletes today to really size up the overall package. Of course, you're being recruited on for a sport, but to have introduction to the academic side and to the overall picture, and to be looking at the bigger picture of what your university life is going to provide for you. And also knowing that these coaches, they may be there your freshman year and then they may be gone the next year. So knowing that when you make that decision for that school, that it is probably a warning sign or a danger sign if you're going just for one coach, as opposed to the overall 4-year opportunity that you've earned to go to a university.
Yeah, I mean, wow, the talk I would have with myself back then. I mean, I get it. I get it. You know, when you're really motivated and you're a high level athlete, and it's easy to get into this thought or this mentality that I need a certain person. The reality is that you don't. And yet we all need a good coach who we can work with, but it is just one piece of the puzzle of that 4-year career, and student athletes look forward to college, right? I mean, it's so, I wanted to go from 8th grade. I was like, send me on, like, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for the big leagues. But you have to step back and you have to look at the big picture and make sure that, like you said, if your coach leaves or if there's a problem with the athletic, if that is all you have, to stand on there, what a disaster that can be. And it was for me. It was.
Yeah, because you also have things like injury. You're an athlete. So there's all the different moving parts that an athlete needs to consider. So I love what you just said. Again, what is that conversation you would have had with yourself in terms of making that decision? Here's a question that goes with it. Did you go to school thinking that you would transfer after a year or so?
Yeah, I definitely didn't go to school with the intention of transferring. I never would have wanted that. The conversation that I would have with myself is that I would tell myself not to go there. I mean, that's the number one thing that I would say. I would say that this coach is showing some obvious red flags. And I had warnings. I had a previous athlete of his write me a letter and tell me, whatever you do, don't go there. And so what did I do? I immediately turned around and shared it with him. And of course he had an explanation, and I was very naive at that time. So there were some red flags that I ignored. I would tell myself that, again, look at the big picture of what is going on. Think about what do you need from your coach, and define what those things are. And if it doesn't fit in that box, or if it's not a conversation you can have with other people in the room, then it doesn't need to exist in general. That your coach is there to serve a specific role, and they're really not there to be your best friend. They're not there to be your counselor. They are not there to be romantically involved with. They're not there to be your tutor. I mean, your coach is there to be a mentor of sorts, but specifically in your athletic endeavors. And you need to make sure you're keeping them in that box, because you have other mentors for your academics, and you have other people you can go to if you're having problems in a relationship, and you have other people you can go to if you're having problems with your friends. And I think it's easy to all kind of fall back on the person that you're spending a lot of time with training every week, but that's inappropriate. And it's inappropriate because it can lead to unhealthy behaviors.
And
vulnerabilities. That you may not be prepared for, and you shouldn't have to deal with at such a young age.
That's incredible education right there, because what you're saying from a 40-year-old perspective now to your 17-year-old self, how are you supposed to know this when you're 17? And the word was vulnerable, right? We go to school as young kids with basically no knowledge. And you're supposed to sort all this stuff out by yourself in the midst of just wanting to play your sport and be great at it and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, and college is such a big transition. So, if you need to prepare for what your different support systems are going to look like, and who your people are, and where your support lies, and you need to know that you need to be able I mean, I think it's very important to put boundaries on your coaching relationships, and that's healthy for them. That's healthy for the coaches and for the athletes. And it's, when I went to college, when I went to growing up in the area that I did, it was called the bubble. You lived in the bubble. It was sort of this, what's the word for it? I hate to say Stepford, but there's a little part of that, little bit of Pleasantville going on, and just not really exposed to a lot of different kinds of people and situations. And that was lovely growing up, but very unprepared for, facing somebody who's very manipulative. And going there for this coach and for this athletic program and having that go bad was just led to a total disaster.
So I guess that leads us to college then, and boundaries. So what does that road look like, Jessica? You get to school, now you're on your own, you're out of your parents' supervision, and you're a track athlete for University of Texas, alone with the coach now, full time. What happens at this stage, and how does that relationship with the coach progress?
Okay, so for me, are you asking how that?
Yeah, so
what happened to me?
Yeah, so basically you get there and you've trusted your entire college life to this guy, and it goes horribly wrong. But
he holds your scholarship, right? And so for me,
tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about the power of a scholarship and what that was to you.
When you have a full scholarship and it's in the hands of your coach, it really gives them a very unique place of power over you, because it's if you are not meeting whatever it is that they want from you, it could be your academics, it could be your athletics, it could be your health. There are rules to protect that people and students, and I don't know what those are, but I definitely have seen scholarships yanked for various reasons, whether they were technically allowed to be done or not. And so that puts you in a position where you are very vulnerable to your coach. This coach has got your 4 years in their hand, and if you upset them for some reason, if you aren't meeting all their different requirements, or if you're not fulfilling something that expectations they have of you that's not related to athletics, which was the case for me, which was unexpected. I arrived at school early to start training in the fall of 1999, and I was invited to dinner with my former coach and his wife and the assistant coach and their spouse. And, he leaned over to me. I'd had my haircut, new haircut for college. And he leaned over to me and he said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but that haircut's really sexy." And I've never heard something like that. There's been some things that were inappropriate, I thought, looking back, just asking too personal questions, but to actually make a direct statement like that was unexpected for me. And that was, I kind of thought, okay. And that was the first time I thought, oh, I must have misinterpreted that. It must be me. And so those behaviors just escalated with time, as that tolerance, I guess, was sort of built, as I did nothing really about it, but sort of shrug it off and say that was weird. Maybe that, I don't know why that happened, but I've just arrived at college, it hasn't even started yet. What are you to do? I can tell you what I do now.
Well, that's right. So that is a red flag looking back at it now. What would you tell somebody in your shoes today what to do at that very first dinner?
Yeah, at that very first dinner, I would have said that is not an appropriate statement to make to your incoming freshman high jumper. There is no right way to take that. That's not there. There's no reason to hear the word sexy between me and my coach. So it was an unnecessary comment, and I would have called it out now. I would have no problem calling it out now, but back then I just was shocked and don't think I did anything, because that was my defense mechanism. That was my safe place was when something inappropriate happened, I would just freeze or sort of like stop and absorb it, but not do anything. There was no action that followed it.
Sure. And as a young girl, you don't really know either. Is it inappropriate, like you just said, or you're putting it on yourself thinking, maybe I just don't know what the go is here. So that was grooming behavior, starting subtly. And then how did that escalate with this guy? Where did that lead?
It was a lot of different things, and I can't really this far out always be able to put them in the right order. But, it was things like calling my room every night to, say, hey, how was your day? Even if I'd already seen you at practice, making sure I was in my room, going to bed. So control there. There was, a point where I had to write down everything I ate and report it. There was a lot of weigh-ins. There was, a time when I woke up and he was in my all girls dorm room. There was
he was in your room?
Yes.
What was he doing in your room?
That was more towards the end when I had an injury, and I had a really, really nasty high ankle sprain, and I was in my room and it was painful. And I couldn't go to practice, and he was coaching the cross country team. And so he came to the dorm, and my roommate was on the cross country team. So my assumption is, I never got an answer from her, but my assumption is he had let her into the room and gone into the bathroom and left me alone. And when I woke up in my nightgown, he was next to my bed, and he pulled back the cover and was kissing my ankle. So, something like that. A point where he went to hug me after practice, and I said, no, don't hug me. Oh, I'm sweaty, I'm gross. And he reached in and grabbed me and pulled me in, and he licked up the right side of my neck, which to this day just makes me ill to think about. So just behaviors like that, putting his hands, under my clothes. I mean, it was just, there were lots of events where, it starts out with this one comment that's not appropriate, probably him testing the water, and then I just sort of do nothing but sit there and I'm quiet. And then, just more and more behavior like that. And I thought, I don't know why. I thought I couldn't say, stop, don't do that. I mean, even if I put up my hands and said, no, but no, no, because you can, you absolutely can, you should. But I had this, I think maybe growing up in the South, maybe the way my parents raised me, but I had such this respect for, my teachers and my coaches, and nobody had ever really, I'd had one coach do something weird, but it was very small and it never happened again. So I hadn't really had this sort of experience. So I just think I didn't know how to even process it.
Did you feel that you were the only one going through this? Did you have, I'm just tying back a little bit to that letter that another athlete sent you before you accepted going to UT about this particular coach, that's sticking with me. And now here you are experiencing all of these things. Did you feel like you were the only one, or?
I did. The letter had this talk about something that didn't have the sexual component to it. It talked about mental, emotional abuse. And even then, in everything I was going through, I couldn't even recall that letter. It took me a while. It took me till many months later that I could actually remember that letter had existed. And so I did. I felt very alone. I never saw him do it to anybody else, and nobody else saw him really do it to me. So I just assumed that it was only me.
And then at what point, so what's the turning point here? There's a lot of slow grooming, and now there's physical contact. You're obviously distressed by his physical behavior with you. What's the next point? What's the tipping point?
Well, so, for me, I didn't want that behavior, and even all the physical signs that said no, I never shouted it and pushed. And so it just kept happening. And so my mental health began to decline. I had some problems with, I think, just searching for control. I started developing some bulimic activity where I would binge and purge, which I had lost some weight and I was in really good shape, but I started to just like kind of lose control. I started to not be able to sleep very well. I went to a track meet where I was called into his room for a meeting, which don't need to happen alone in your coach's hotel room. There's no reason that should ever, I can't think of a reason that that's necessary. And I went to this meeting and it was that time when he put his hands under my clothes. And I went out that day and I jumped at the same height I jumped, I think, in 7th grade at a competition. So I couldn't compete. I was never stronger, squatting more, running faster, doing all these, meeting all these perimeters, but I couldn't compete. And I was starting to have panic attacks at the track. So it really manifested. And I think that's the reason that it came to a head so quickly. I think had I been able to really function, I don't know, maybe there are people who can compete or make good grades in those situations, but I'm not one of them. I was just imploding. And so, at some point talking to my parents, what is going on? I started to slowly give them a little bit like, well, he's really mean to me and he calls me fat and he does these things. So I gave them a little bit just to help them understand. But I held on to the sexual stuff for many more months. And sometime around there, I mean, there was a lot, everything really came to a head at the end of our indoor season before our outdoor season. One of the other female athletes we revealed to each other what was going on. And it turns out that some of these things were happening to her. And I had no idea. She lived just a few doors down in the dorm. And I had no idea that it was happening to her.
So all these, just to touch on that, it's really important to look at the damage that this type of behavior and this sexual abuse can have. Tell us a bit about what you were going through in terms of your physical and emotional behaviors that were changing. It's something that can help other people recognize, or maybe a person outside of someone that's being abused can recognize. Here you are in the middle of your supposedly best years of your life, and you're talking about your grades and panic attacks at the track, bulimic, eating disorders. Tell us a bit about that. Did you know what was happening to you? Had you had these things before? What was going on?
I had never had any of these things before. Like I had an illness my senior in high school. And when I graduated, I knew that I had gained some weight and I knew that I needed to lose that. And I did, when I got to college. But this, like I definitely had not experienced anxiety before. I mean, I had no idea what was happening. Or depression and the sleeping problems. I mean, all of this stuff was so new to me. And I think that my go-to was self-blame. Like that was my go-to. I'm certain that I just internalized it. I've done something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. I'm not as good as I thought I was. I'm not as, I'm letting everyone down. I don't know why this is happening to me with this coach. Why is this happening? What did I do something? Like, I don't understand. I've got all these other teammates and it's not happening to them. Why is this happening to me? So I just took it all in, and it just manifested with GI issues, control issues, panic attacks, sleeping weird, like sleep a quarter of the day, awake quarter of the day, sleep a quarter of the way. I mean, just very bizarre, and nothing I'd ever had before. So I just really didn't know what to do with any of it.
And here you are at college. Did you get any help, or did you just deal with it? You're just going through every single day living like that?
So once I realized that there was a young woman on my team who was going through similar things, I finally just felt relieved. And as we started to talk to other people, we found that there were some more people who maybe didn't experience what we did. It was a little bit different for everyone, but people had some things that they could say where, like, finally I was like, it's not me. it's not me. It's just like, and that to me was like the first step, and just like releasing it was just knowing that it wasn't just me. I mean, just there were others, and I should have felt bad for them. You know, I should have, but I didn't. I just was just so thankful that it wasn't just me. And then I started to just open up to my parents, who were trying to understand what was going on. You know, they could see I was in great shape, and here I am in college, and but I can't compete. And that's just so unlike me, because they know I'd been nothing but successful for so long. They didn't even understand how I could be such great health and shape, from the outside looking in, and I couldn't do anything competitive wise. And so I kind of did get to the point where they were like, my mom, like, what is going on? And so I had to give her a little bit to help to give her an answer. And it was the honest answer, but I held a lot of that back. I wasn't ready to share it all.
So when you talk about, and that's talking to your mom on the phone, correct?
Yes.
Right. So she can't see you. What physical, if she had seen you, would she have seen
She saw a lot of weight loss. But she felt like, I mean, there's no handbook for a parent when you're training a high level athlete. And that wasn't anything any of their friends had. So they saw me getting really thin. They saw me getting very toned. So, I mean, physically I was changing, but they thought maybe this is the part of the college experience, but they also noticed I was having control with the food, and they didn't like that. But I think they were also the loss. Like, before I came home for Thanksgiving, I said, I can't have pumpkin pie. And Mom's like, okay, don't have pumpkin pie. Like,
that's weird.
I mean, looking back, my mom's like, that's weird. Like, now she was like, oh yeah, it's because you were like, we're getting very controlled about all this stuff. And you were being controlled, like somebody was weighing you all the time. Like, I had no idea that was a part of this. So I think from the outside in, my family wasn't there, and the only people surrounding me were track team, really. I didn't have any other community. I didn't have an academic community. Like, nobody, if they weren't on my team, there was nobody there that would have seen what was happening. I had one friend who was on the golf team, and a guy who I ended up dating a little bit, and he saw it. He was the only one, and he saw it, and he expressed concern. But I mean, again, he's 18, 19 years old. He doesn't know what to do about it. If I was sad or crying, he wanted to be there to help, but really not equipped to help me in a way that I needed.
So as it's at this stage, how bad does it get? And at what stage are you starting to make decisions about what's next?
Well, I knew I couldn't stay at UT because it was a very malignant program at that time. As far as, if you weren't competing well, wow, were you treated poorly? And I guess, I don't know if that's how they got their national championship or what, but I knew I couldn't stay. And I mean, my coach was holding my scholarship over my head and telling me, you're not competing well, they're going to take it away. I'm going to get in trouble because I gave you the scholarship. So, again, lumping more of that guilt and, just really like putting the salt on the wound. And I knew I had to go. And so I started looking around, and I got injured at the beginning of my outdoor season. And it was such a bad injury. It took me out. Such a blessing that happened to me, because it took me away from the traveling team. So I got to step away from that and talk to my parents a little bit more and start to open up a little bit more. And then when my mom came down and saw what a mess I was, that's when she immediately took me to the health center. Let's see someone about getting you meds to help you sleep. Let's, and then starting to plan for the summer. When you come home, we're going to have you in therapy, all like really setting it up. She didn't want me to finish the semester, but I was very stubborn and I wanted to. Like, I couldn't walk away from getting through some of these classes. And so I stayed, but there was a plan in place for when I came home, because she could see how unhealthy it is. And when I got home, things got even worse, as far as she could actually see it with her eyes, what was happening every day, because I had started to self-mutilate and cut my arms and try to hide it with like a like bracelets or things. And she knew, because she said, why are you wearing you don't wear a bandana on your wrists normally. We were like at Walmart and she was like, why do you have that on? And she grabbed it and she pulled it off and she saw it and she was like, oh my God.
Wow.
Oh no. Because she knew, being in mental health, like what was happening. Like it wasn't like I could say, oh, I cut myself on blah, 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 blah. Like she knew the moment she saw what was happening.
How were you feeling? What was that like to be in that situation? To hear you say that just sends chills through my body.
I was in so much pain that the only thing that made me feel better was to cut myself. So, and like, I get a little bit emotional about it, but it's something that I've like thought back on and relived enough to where it's I'm able to kind of blunt it the way that it feels to go back there. It's just that I did let my athletics, I was the 9th graduate in my high school class. I could have gone anywhere I wanted to. I had the grades, I had the SATs, and sport and academics were really important to me, but my love was sports.
Yeah.
And it was a big part of my identity, which I think is true for a lot of athletes. You really identify with that part of you. And I think it's important to realize that that is just one part, because if it's taken away, and sometimes it is because of something like this or your health or whatever, it can take your whole sense of self away, even if you have these other things. And so, because as much as I knew it was important to make good grades and I cared about it, I didn't put my self-worth there like I should have. And I just gave too much of my self-worth and I did, like, if you were to say, who's Jessica, I would have said, like, Jessica's a great high jumper, so I think it's so important not to do that. And that's just, you can do that, but you have to have a hearty list of all the other things. And even if they're things you're doing now, but like what your goals are, so that you can round it out and see that if this one piece gets taken away, it really is just one piece.
That's heavy. Yep. And it goes back to when you're going to a university like that, having that administration and that entire team around you, where the coach, part of their responsibility would be to make sure your academic advisors are in place, make sure the emotional support networks are in place, what all the resources around a university are available, are made to you, and that you're fully aware of that, so that you can have access to all of those things. It just sounds like you were truly alone in this situation, and without having your mom there, where would that have left you if someone hadn't just come in and said, no, we're taking you home and we need to help you?
I don't think that I would be where I'm at. I'm sure I would have in some ways made it through, but I don't think I would be where I'm at. My mom helped create a plan. My dad to make sure that plan followed through. So it's when people are going through a hard time, like people I see now, and you say, well, they really need therapy. Well, they don't want to go. Well, of course they don't want to go.
Yeah.
The people who often need therapy are the ones that need it the most, are not the ones that want to go. So they took that decision. They took that out of my hands and said, no, you're going to go. You need this. And I know that that's a fine line to walk when you're making people do, but a lot of times when you're very depressed, you do not have that initiative. You do not have that desire. You're just down here and you don't see that light. And so, if they hadn't been there, I don't know. I don't know if I would have I'm sure I would have transferred. I don't know. I honestly don't think I've ever thought about what it would have been like, but it wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have filed a formal complaint. I needed them to tell me, it was wrong what happened to you. And it's okay to say that out loud. It's okay to say that it was wrong. And we have to we have to call it by its name and what it is, and we have to get it out there, and we have to talk about it, because you can't carry this. And one day my mother was in her office crying. I think it was the summer I came home, or the year after that. She was just crying in her office, and the medical director of psychiatry for Cook's Children's walked by and saw her, and she said, "Why are you crying?" And she's a friend of my mom's, and she was also my physician. And my mom said, "Because I don't even recognize my daughter. She's like a shell of herself. She won't look people in the eye. She's just looking down. She's like, she has this flat affect. She doesn't look like her." And my mom, my psychiatrist said, "No, she's going to be fine." She said, "Because she's facing this when she's 19 years old, not when she's 40 years old. So she is going to be just fine, because we're going to take care of this now, so that she doesn't have to carry this and face it when she legitimately said she doesn't have to face this when she's 40 years old."
Wow. Incredible. So where did that lead after this? After you've had the summer and you're home with your mom, you go back to UT, and do you report this?
So what happened is I decided to transfer during the outdoor season that was at the end of my first year at UT. So I decided to transfer at that point. And so as I looked at all the things that were available, and I had a number of full scholarships, like to Purdue and some other places, maybe not the same schools as before, but a lot of good programs. I actually took a half scholarship to the University of Arkansas after giving up all those full scholarships, because I had at the time, a friend there who said, "This is safe. Like, you'll be safe here. I've been here for a year. I'm on the track team. I'm not treated like that. My coaches don't get involved like that. That's not going to happen here." And that's my expectations went from, I want the elite coach, the best student, to just, I want to be safe. And so I went to the University of Arkansas, which was within driving distance, 5 hours from my home. And I had somebody there, and I didn't, I looked at the academics, and she, at that time she was pre-med, and I was thinking of going pre-med. And so that was a good fit. And I transferred there the next year. Now that summer is when I filed the formal complaint. And during my first year at the University of Arkansas, there was some interviews and discussions and talking to lawyers at UT. And that was the second trauma, because ultimately they talked to me, they made me revisit it, they interviewed all these people, and then they just came back and told me that, it wasn't super appropriate, but it wasn't sexual harassment or assault or anything like that. They called it boorish behavior. And that was the second trauma, because I told the people, I felt like if I tell them what happened, and my therapist and you've got to, you need to tell somebody. And so I did it. I got up the courage, and I sat down and I wrote this 25 page typed letter about everything that I could remember that happened. And I filed it, and nothing happened. So that was just also, and having to relive it for those first 6 months of my new university, my depression got worse, and I continued to self-mutilate. And so at the end of my first 6 months at the University of Arkansas, when that report came out, and they said, "Nope, they didn't, he's fine. He didn't do anything," or whatever. It was inappropriate, but slap on the wrist, anger management classes. That's when I told my parents, "I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't, this is killing me. Like, I can't do it. I have to, like, I tried. I'm sorry." They still don't believe me, and they don't care at all. They just care about protecting themselves, I guess. I don't really know what their motivations were, but they weren't the best for the students. That's what they weren't.
Just to clarify, who did you report to? So where's this coming from in the university? Who says licking your neck and all this 25 pages of report on this guy says it's boorish?
It was an internal review, right? So there was nobody outside of the university that was a part of that. And it was done by their legal team, and it was signed off by the chancellor, the vice chancellor.
Jeez. So
I still have, the paperwork that they signed. So there were a lot of names that were high up in the administration that signed off on that. And to me, that was such a betrayal. I think that as time goes on, I think that's one of the things that I wrestle with the most, is just the complicity that these people, they knew better and they did nothing. I mean, that to me is the hardest thing to stomach about. I have so much anger to this day. Like I have so much anger towards the University of Texas. And I think it's a different anger than I have towards that horrible coach, that predator. You know, I'm unhappy with him, but I see him as just a very evil and or sick person. But it doesn't really affect me the same way when I look at the University of Texas and know that they knew and they did nothing. I cannot come to peace with that.
And that's you. And then they let him go on to do this to however many other young student athletes for however many years. He's been through the system up until just very recently, since you guys started your class action lawsuit, and he's finally been suspended from coaching. But how many years since you filed that report, he was out there coaching at the university level?
2000. 20 years.
20 years.
20 years he was coaching. He went to, and I would look it up every now and then. He went to SMU, then he went to Stanford, then he went to, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Cal Poly or Cal Berkeley. And then by the time we got him suspended, he was coaching at high school, which also begs the question, how does an elite high jumping coach at the university, why would they switch schools every 2 to 3 years and ultimately end up at high school? I think that's very unusual. And I cannot think of many coaches who are in that situation. And I think it's very telling that he's probably been moved about quite a bit. And there's probably been a lot of complicity at a lot of different places for this to happen like this.
Oh, so Jessica, so it doesn't look like it got much better when you made your transfer. You would look to, so first of all, for those that don't know, how much does a college scholarship equate to in monetary terms per year? Just let's hear that. What you turned down.
I don't think that I will ever really know, because my parents picked up the other half, which I'm very thankful that they did. And I ended up taking out some loans, but they were very minimal. I mean, today's going to school in Texas state, like I mean, Texas A&M, Texas, that's what, you know, what are they, 100,000 a year?
They're
I mean, it's
huge price tags, regardless of where you go. So when I hear you say that, it's just mind blowing, because you've worked your whole life to get to university, and it's an incredible achievement and accomplishment. And you earn a scholarship, which it's a big price tag. And then to hear you say that you're transferring for these reasons, and then to go to a school for half a scholarship just to be safe, it's a really sad thing for me to hear. And then when you transfer to be safe, you don't sound like you've gotten any better, and it actually gets worse. What happens? Where do you go from here when you're in this situation?
You know, I still had, once that lawsuit finally, the formal complaint, once we finally just, I mean, there was no, what's the word I'm looking for? There was no closure. I just put it on the shelf. And I said, I've got to move on. And so I actually lost my friendship, because I was in such a bad place and I was leaning on them and asking for support. And that friend of mine didn't know how to support me. And it felt like more betrayal. So I just completely started over. I made new friends. I actually ended up becoming friends with a bunch of women on the volleyball team. One of my best friends was on that team. In fact, my daughter's nickname is after her. And I made friends I switched from pre-med to pre-vet. And so I joined the pre-veterinary club, and I got to know those people, and I developed an academic community and did Golden Key and became president of that and got that community. And I just developed these communities in college, in different places. Through my college, through my academics, through my extracurriculars, and then the coaches were actually really great coaches. In fact, they are now like the national champions there. And they bounced me around between the coaches. The third one was a good fit, and it was very, very matter of fact, and do this and do that and you'll do well. And that was exactly what I needed. And so I just, I met someone, started dating and having an actual normal college relationship with another college student, which I had never really been afforded me, because my coach wouldn't speak to me if he found out that I was going on a date or something. We had a whole week where he wouldn't talk to me after I had a date with a basketball player, ET. So I got to date and I got to be a normal student, and then I just healed. And after my third year there, I ended up getting second at the NCAAs, going from jumping, nothing, my middle school height, to, achieving a personal best, tying for first, got second on just the misses of the bar, getting to be seventh in the nation. And when I was at these big meets, it took me a long time to come back, like physically and emotionally, and just to recover. I lost. I would say I had one really good year. So I would say I lost 3 years to this: 1 to the trauma, 2 to recover. And that third year, which I redshirted for injury, so I got an extra outdoor season, but that third year was my big year. And I'm so grateful for that. And I knew after everything I went through that that's when I really understood that the athletics were that piece of that puzzle, and that I was already looking to the next thing in graduate school, and what is the big picture for me. And I survived, and then I thrived, and I'm grateful for that. But it still doesn't make all that okay, you know? I don't think that anyone say that it was. There's definitely that silver lining, and I'm so grateful for it. But it still doesn't make it okay, just because I was able to come back.
Just to go back a little bit, was hearing that you had no support. What can you say to the people around you? This is something that comes up a lot, where somebody's suffering in silence a trauma like you have, and nobody knew how to deal with it. You're talking about college kids. What could we look at today for a kid that's in your scenario? What can they do if we're surrounded by college kids and they don't have the answers, or they don't ask the right questions? What should we be doing when we find ourselves in those holes or dark places, or dealing with something that's quite profound?
I hope this is one case where we're using the internet, if nothing else, in this way to start that process, because we didn't have that back then, right? So it truly felt like, what are you going to go pick up a book? Like, how are you going to? So there are some really nice online resources like No More, Rain, or, there are places that you can call and talk to someone that I never knew about. Even if it's not somebody at your university, there are safe places at the university, and those safe places may be outside the athletic department. I know there are probably universities that have safe places in their athletic department, but I cannot say which ones. And I know that that's not true universally. It wasn't true for me. I couldn't go to the athletic trainer and get support. What I found was more support from my coach. So it could be through the student health center that's outside of that. It could, you can always talk to someone. It can be, you may be able to get it through academic advisors that are associated with athletics, or you may have to go outside of that, or it may be a professor that has nothing to do with your athletic career. There are those people. It's just finding the strength to be vulnerable, to talk to them about it and open up to them.
How important would it be as an incoming freshman now to have that type of information provided to you as a preventative measure, not sitting there in the middle of your university years, in the middle of traumatic sexual abuse by your coach, trying to work it out in the moment when you said you're cutting yourself and you're depressed. What part of our education should provide this going from high school, provide it then, and then again when you're a freshman? What resources are available?
I think it is so important to do it before you go to college. I think it is so important to nail this down, because when a student athlete goes there, they're going to have their orientation, but that orientation is going to be so hyped up. Those things are going to be skimmed over, right? Those things are going to be, they're probably in there and they may be in the fine print. But I think helping, again, if you go to college and you're expecting to find it there, that's going to be very tricky, because unless things have changed greatly, and maybe they have, that support, you're not going to be guided. So I think it would be wise to identify what you can do in a situation if you encounter something like that, and even have scenarios. I mean, this sexual assault and harassment that happened to me has affected the way that I talk to my children. And when my son was 7, I had to sit down during this lawsuit and explain what this lawsuit was about. And then I felt that I had to tell him, like, walk him through a scenario where if somebody tries to put their hands in your pants, what do you say? And he's like, no. And I said, no, you say no, you yell it and you push and you be aggressive. And that may be kind of inappropriate for a kid that young, but I would rather err on the side of having my kid be empowered really young to say no. Like, I don't care if it's the principal, it doesn't matter who it is. And that I will always believe them if something happens, and that I want them to talk to me about it. And so, my daughters are 7, and in this next year, we're going to be having these same conversations and these same role-playing things that probably make them uncomfortable, where I say, if somebody does this or tries to touch you, what do you do? And then I make them yell at me and push me. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a veterinarian. I'm not in child development or psychology, but I figure if at least they have tried it once and seen that it's okay, and their mom has been standing there telling them, do this, we need to tell those to high school. What if there's a high school girl who's never shoved someone back and said no, or put their arms up and said no? Like, I think maybe you have to prepare that the possibility like that of something could happen, and what would you do, and physically maybe act it out.
Yeah.
And then also know, like, hey, if something like this happens, these are your resources you don't have to go to your athletic program. You don't have to rely on these people. They can be a part of it. You can pull them in, but don't put all of your eggs in this basket and just hope that they're going to do the right thing. Of course, if this trauma that happens to you is not related directly to your program, maybe there will be that support, maybe not. But if that conflict is within your program, you have got to go outside of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this coming from somebody who did go outside of it and it didn't work, but it's a new time. It's been past Me Too, and we've been through that. We're in that era, and so I think there's a better chance of being heard.
That brings us right up to present day. And you said it earlier, you still have so much rage, Jessica, about all of this. How's that translated in your life today with the class action lawsuit? And what, just give us a little insight into what you're doing, what you want, and what this lawsuit can mean in terms of changing.
It's, the lawsuit came out of Erin wanting to go public with her story.
And just introduce Erin for those that don't know her.
So Erin Aldridge is she was a track and field Olympian and a national champion for the University of Texas.
And she's been a guest here on Open Stance as well. So,
Erin and I were not friends, and a friendship certainly was not encouraged by the coach who was having inappropriate actions towards both of us. So we were abused by the same coach. And so it wasn't encouraged. And so I really felt Erin was sort of a nemesis until she called me at work in the middle of a surgery. She actually tracked me down online, I guess online, and called my work, and I was in the middle of a surgery. And one of my technicians turned around and she said, "Do you know an Aaron Aldridge?" And I mean, it could have been the Pope. I was like, I was like, what? Who's on the phone? I said, what? And so I said, yeah, transfer that back here. And so they got a phone, and they brought it over by surgery and put on speaker or held it up to my ear or something. It was near me. And I said, "This is Dr. Johnson. How can I help you?" And she said, "This is Aaron." And I just said, "Are you calling about our coach?" And she said, "Yes." And she started to tell me, and she said, and I'm at this point, like I was just at the, like finishing up the surgery. I mean, and I said, I just wanted her to tell me what happened. And she said, I should call you later, not at work. And I said, well, there's nothing you can say that everyone in this room hasn't heard. So you go right ahead. Because I was pretty open with, I'd worked with these people for many years, and I told them the story. So Erin had reached out to me, and she wanted to go public and share her story. And there was one person she knew who a long time ago had filed a complaint against this coach, and she tracked me down. And I was very angry with Erin at first. And that was very hard for me to think that she knew back then and she didn't believe me, right? So that's, again, kind of reliving that people don't believe you trauma. And I have really worked through that, and I understand now what happened to her. But anyway, she asked for my support, and I tried to find a lawyer because I did not understand the legal component. Whatever I'd done before in the past that involved lawyers hadn't worked out for me. So I didn't know what was going to happen. And that's how we found a woman who said, this really is a problem. This is a problem with the NCAA. And we started talking about, and I said, well, it's 2020, 2019. That was 19 years ago. The rules, there's got to be these rules, and And she was like, well, no. And so I started looking into it, and I'm like, wait, hold on. They haven't figured this out yet, as far as like really putting boundaries on, the coach and the athlete. When I hear a coach athlete, love story, I don't think that's cute. It just creeps me out. And I'm sure there are some exceptions, but I don't have any love for that situation, and certainly not with young girls, which you are in high school and college. And so she said, well, there's an opportunity for change. And I think our goals are that, there's a lot of layers to this, but if you do file a complaint, this is not something that should be handled entirely internally. I have seen how that works out, and it does not necessarily go well. You need to have somebody who's advocating for you. There should be more support. There should be more education. We shouldn't even be having to tell college students this for the first time. And it makes me sad, because we want our kids to have this innocence and this, but in the world we live in today, and I feel like this education needs to be really starting in elementary school, to be honest.
Yep.
I once heard somebody say that if a girl who's 7 or 8 gets touched inappropriately, she wants the hair on the back of their neck to stand up, and for it to know at that point that it's not okay, stop. Yeah. And I think that early education it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's not for me, because for me it's a very practical education. But I think we need to get uncomfortable, and we need to start preparing people, because these predators will continue to be out there.
Yeah. You are extremely brave, and what you've done today, Jessica, thanks so much for everything. Hugely informational and just loaded with education. I'm really sorry for what you've had to go through. And I feel very fortunate that we can have you here today sharing this incredibly personal experience in a really tough road that you've had to travel. And it's just magnificent that you're able to use your voice in such a commanding way and reach a lot of people that this can potentially just help educate and send them into their lives in a much more empowering and safe perspective. So thanks very much for being here. And all the best with that lawsuit. Love to keep us posted on how that goes. And
when this came to be, I thought about what happened to my mom, and I thought about what happened to me. And then I look at my daughters and I think it's got to stop somewhere. And if this is what I'm meant to have some sort of imprint on, it's not something that I ever wanted to. This isn't the sort of thing that you have dreams about growing up, but this is where we are. And if I can do something that makes them safer, I mean, that's a very real impact for me. And, I hope that, I guess if I were to leave you with one thing, I would say that these students should know that they are very much empowered to say no and stop. And it doesn't matter if it's your coach, and it doesn't matter if he's an Olympic level coach. It doesn't matter, or she, or whatever that circumstance is, because we all deserve, and we're all allowed to have boundaries, and we can enforce those.